Greetings, everybody from Melbourne, Australia. I wish to thank Daryl Edwards and Foundations for Farming for the invitation to speak. I've been a great admirer of Foundations for Farming for many years. The work you're doing in transforming lives and landscapes is simply wonderful. There are three major things that shaped the person that I am and the work that I do to this day. When I was very young, the bushland, which really was my playground, the trees, the hills, the mountain streams, was being bulldozed and replaced with monoculture forestry. Heavy chemicals such as DDT were used in agriculture, and this poisoned the rivers that we used to swim and fish in. At the same time, I was very aware that children just like me, who through no fault of their own happened to be born elsewhere, were going to be hungry. And so I was a very angry boy, but frustrated because I didn't know how to change those things that were so wrong. Fortunately for me, I was very influenced by my mum, who had a strong faith, and it gave me a framework for living, that there are more important things than financial security, that we are our brother's keeper. We have a duty of care for those less fortunate than ourselves. And we have a duty to be good stewards of God's creation. And so what to do? I did the one thing that I had power over. I shut up a child's prayer, asking God to use me somehow, somewhere to make a difference. And in my mind, that was the start of this journey. And I've tried to honor that prayer, and I believe that God has blessed it. I studied agriculture at university, where I met my wife, Liz. We joined mission organizations serving in mission and were assigned to a station in Niger Republic, West Africa, a landlocked country on the border of the Sahara Desert. The landscape that confronted us when we arrived there was at the point of ecological collapse and barely able to support life. Even though in my lifetime, I was 23, 24 at that time, this had been a biodiverse dryland forest with wildlife, with permanent springs, with fertile farms in the clearings. And so in 2 short decades, it had been degraded to this point where it could barely feed the population living there. There are consequences for environmental destruction. In Niger Republic, people were experiencing increased frequency and severity of drought. Soil fertility was lost. There was no fodder for livestock for much of the year. And in those years when it did rain, there would be explosions of insect pests because there were no natural predators left to control the numbers. So people really suffered. There was hunger, there was displacement, there was conflict over scarce resources. Everybody suffered. Women and children suffered the most. When the menfolk went away looking for work, they were left to care for all the farm duties. Water tables dropped, and they were already very, very deep, sometimes 60, even 100 meters deep. They had to walk further for fuel wood. Food was scarce. Life was very hard for women and children. Niger seemed to contradict that biblical picture that we have of God's abundance, of the earth's bounty. And I questioned God, did you really mean this verse here? Did you really supply everything that we need for life, our physical needs and godliness in Niger? The evidence about me seemed to be the opposite to what I was reading in Scripture. However, the longer we stayed in that country and started to learn how to work with God's creation instead of destroying it, the more we realized, yes, indeed, God has provided everything we need for our physical needs and for godliness. In my mind, if deforestation was one of the major root causes of all these problems, then the solution was relatively easy. Let's get trees back in the land. And I tried everything. I studied, I experimented, I consulted with the experts. Nothing worked in a sustainable, economically viable way. More than 80% of the seedlings perished, And the thanks that I got from the very people whom I'd come to help was they called me the crazy white farmer. Who in their right mind would plant trees on their valuable farmland when they're already hungry? I sympathized with them, but I was convinced that under these environmental conditions, it would be impossible to have food security without some protective measure of tree cover in this landscape. And so I poured heart and soul into this, but it was a failure. And as a young man, I was getting very, very discouraged. It would have been quite easy to give up and go home. One morning, this was the reading in my quiet time. When you send your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. And I sensed that God was speaking to me through this, but I didn't stop and reflect. And I rushed off to get on with the duties of the day. Later that day, as I was driving to the villages, I stopped on a landscape just like this photo here, got out of the vehicle and looked in every direction, north, south, east, west, barely a tree in sight. And I was doing the maths. How many $1 million? How many decades? How many hundreds of staff to even make a small impact in restoring this devastated landscape? In disgust, I started to turn around to get back into the villages. And as I did that, I looked down at the ground. There's a little crack in the ground, and a plant, a seedling, was germinating, pushing through that crack in the ground. I remembered that verse, and I realized, yes, God's not only in the business of saving souls and of healing broken humanity, God is equally in the business of healing and restoring his broken creation. And this gave me hope and courage. It's not my work alone. I don't have to do this in my own strength and my own wisdom. This is actually God's work. And if we give ourselves fully to him and trust in him, he'll show us what to do. And so I was somewhat comforted by that, but I still didn't know what the solution was. Not long after that episode, I was delivering a truck and trailer load of tree seedlings to the villages and feeling a bit discouraged. Most of these would die. The people ridiculed me. They didn't understand the value of the trees. It seemed very, very hopeless. But I remembered that child's prayer used me somehow, somewhere to make a difference. And I didn't think God would make mistakes. And so I shot up this prayer, asking God to please forgive us for destroying the gift of his creation. And as a consequence of that destruction, people are suffering. There's hunger, there's poverty, there's even fearfulness about what the next day will bring. But I reminded God, you love us, we're your children. Help us, show us what to do, open our eyes. The amazing thing is, I'd been traveling on this bush track nearly weekly for 2.5 years, eyes open, but totally blind to what had been there all along. And if you look in the right corner there, upper right corner there, there's what appears as a weed or perhaps a desert bush. And on this particular day, it caught my attention, and I took the trouble to walk over and take a closer look. Immediately, when you look at the shape of the leaf of any plant, it's like a signature. It tells you what species that plant is. And in that instant, for me, everything changed. I realized it's not a bush or a weed, it's a tree. And I bent over, brushed away the sand that had accumulated, and sure enough, there was a stump under those emerging shoots. Everything changed because I knew from my 2.5 years traveling in the countryside, there were literally millions of these seeming bushes across that landscape. This was a potential forest that was hidden underground. And this was the start of an agricultural and environmental revolution in that country. I call it the underground forest because if we had special vision and we could see beneath the surface of the soil, we would quickly realize that when you cut a tree down, for most species, it's not the death of the tree. It's not the end of the story. And this tree stump has deep roots with access to moisture and nutrients and stored sugars. And if we allow it, if we protect it, it can actually regrow into a tree very, very quickly. And so my whole approach shifted from one of being primarily technical, which species, what timing, what methods, primarily technical, to more social. And today, 95% of my work involves regreening mindscapes, regreening mindsets. If it was people's false beliefs about the value of trees and God's creation that led to such negative attitudes and destructive practices, then it was what people believed about God's creation that's where the real battle lay. And if I can convince farmers and communities, actually, it's in your best interest to work with God's creation instead of destroying it, then the rest is relatively easy because God's provided a way to heal these lands. The method became known as farmer managed natural regeneration, or FMNR. It's very, very simple, and the steps include finding and selecting those trees which you want to regenerate. And by the way, they can grow from tree stumps, sometimes from bits of root with the capacity to sprout, and very often from dormant seed in the soil. So find the ones and select the ones that you want to regenerate. In the case of tree stumps, there'll be many, many stems. So it's very important to prune away the excess. Just leave the strongest, the most robust, the healthiest stems and cut away the rest. And often we recommend leaving up to 5 because then there's surplus there for utilization. Protect those stems from threats, fire, roaming livestock, from cutting. Let's agree as a community to come together and create our own set of bylaws on how we protect this growth. Allow the trees to grow and monitor the growth. And importantly, while these principles apply for restoring natural ecosystems, in this case, we're talking about people's private property, people's livelihoods. And FMNR gives people the right to utilize the trees that we're growing. In this instance, we're not creating national parks, we're creating functional agroforestry farming systems. But the principles do apply when we want to restore natural systems as well. So over the following years, farmers in Niger created this agroforest parkland. This is agricultural land growing crops and raising livestock with the protective cover of the trees. And over the following 20 years, from 1984 onwards, this method spread to some 5 million hectares, and farmers regenerated over 200 million trees on their agricultural land. These days, we have World Vision has developed a monitoring system called Solstice. Now, I'll just find the right page. It's a tool for mapping and monitoring, and the platform's called Solstice. It's free, open source software, and it's available to everyone, everywhere. Solstice enables us to map FMNR sites and track how change over time is occurring via satellite imagery, and to demonstrate the impacts beyond the project boundaries and beyond a project's time period. Just list a few features. It enables us to conduct and capture household surveys, to instantaneously determine the area of the land that we're restoring. It works in remote areas without connectivity, and it builds a dashboard and maps to track progress. But why? Why would farmers who thought I was crazy adopt FMNR? Firstly, Many trees, all trees add organic matter to the soil. Some trees, such as Phytoherbia, add nitrogen. All trees attract livestock, which bring dung and urine and fertilize the soil. So grain yields increase. That grain, because of the nitrogen fixing trees, has more protein and there's more crop residue that can be utilized as well. In this particular trial of Phytoherbia, it's not an FMNR trial, but it just shows the impact of having trees in the field with this particular species. Crop yields increased 2 to 3-fold. Secondly, certain trees have the capability of practicing hydraulic lift. Through their deep tap roots, they access water in the soil profile. At night time, some of that moisture is leaked out through the shallow roots. This photo in Niger was taken in a drought year, and rather counterintuitively, the only place where the crop is not just surviving but actually thriving is near the base of the tree, partly because of this sharing of moisture. Additionally, when we do FMNR at scale, what we're witnessing is greater infiltration of moisture into the soil and a rising of the water tables. So FMNR can improve availability of water and it can help drought-proof crops. Trees provide habitat for predators of pests, insect-eating birds, spiders, lizards, and so on, now provide a free service, clearing the fields of pests, and there are no toxic residues. Importantly, in many regions, trees regenerated in this way, indigenous trees, provide important fodder for livestock. The leaves, the seed pods are often edible. And what we're finding in some studies is that the grasses persist longer into the dry season when they're sheltered by this dappled shade of the FMNR trees. Shade itself is very important for livestock health and productivity. There's less stress on the animals and they continue to produce milk and meat and so on, even when conditions are very, very hot. The impact in Niger has been very, very significant. Across that 5 million hectares, it's estimated that gross incomes have increased by about $1,000 per household, and cumulatively, every year, without subsidies, without government enforcement or continued NGO interventions, every year, Nigerian farmers are producing an additional $900 million in gross income, benefiting 4.5 million people. Every year, without artificial fertilizers, pesticides, or irrigation, Nigerian farmers are growing an additional 500,000 tons of grain, enough to feed 2.5 million people, just by virtue of the fact that they are now working with creation instead of fighting it. Soil fertility has increased, and there's a much better microclimate for growing things in. And so there are many, many benefits, many reasons why farmers are embracing FMNR. If I just talk a little bit about resilience, because we now have greater diversity, there are new opportunities for different income streams, beekeeping, fattening of livestock, different crops, different livestock. And so it's very unlikely, no matter what adverse climatic effect happens in a particular year, the more diversity you have, the more likely you are to have at least one of those enterprises to succeed, even in a diverse year. So people's resilience is increased. I've had the great privilege of witnessing this great reversal. What had been a downward spiral of degradation, poverty, and despair, now through working with God's creation, farmers growing more and different types of crops and livestock, and farmers being much more resilient in the face of climatic shocks, that downward spiral is reversed into an upward spiral of restoration, relative prosperity, and importantly, the restoration of hope. In fact, the biggest change that I see is this restoration of hope. People who saw themselves as being hopeless victims of climate change and poverty, through becoming aware of this simple solution, literally a solution at your feet, they've become empowered, they've become enabled to create that future that they want for themselves and their children. And going into the communities, this sense of renewed hope is very, very palpable. So how and where could FMNR fit into Pumbudza? You'll notice in this photo that the farmer hasn't cleared all the tree stumps. I've put the circles around remaining tree stumps. It's very important to note that it's not called Tony Managed Natural Regeneration or World Vision Managed Natural Regeneration. The farmer decides. And so we encourage experimentation on a small area of the farm initially, observation and dialogue. Compare notes with neighbours, learn from each other, learn from project staff if you're in a project setting. How many trees will I leave? Which species will I select? How harshly will I prune? Where will I do FMNR? There's certainly guidance, and there's a manual, there's an online training course, there's lots of documentation and short videos. There's guidance, but at the end of the day, the farmer decides. It's farmer managed. And so we can do FMNR directly in Funvudza plots. We can do it on land not intensively managed by the owner. It could be grazing land or fallowed land. We could do it on communal land. If we organize ourselves as a community, we can agree on how we manage communal land differently, or we could do it on all three of those types of landscapes. What does FMNR offer to Fumbudza? A measure of drought tolerance. And I talked about hydraulic lift and reduced evaporation and reduced wind speed and temperatures. So a measure of drought tolerance that bare fields don't enjoy. Trees themselves provide a lot of mulch material in the form of leaf litter. Trees provide natural fertilizer, some nitrogen fixing, all produce organic matter just by virtue of their presence. In a dusty environment like Niger, the leaves used to capture dust from the air, and measurable amounts of potassium and micronutrients were imported into the farm because there were trees there. So there's different ways that trees add fertility to the soil. There's resilience through the diversification that's possible once we bring trees back, and many, many more benefits. So I see FMNR really not competing with Fumbudza, but being a complementary activity that's totally managed by the farmers and communities themselves to help them achieve their own goals. It's been my great joy to share this knowledge with you. Wherever FMNR has been introduced, it brings life and joy. Where people have embraced it, it brings life and joy. And so I want to challenge you. I hope you found this talk enlightening. I want to challenge you to at least try it. Talk about it with your family, with your community. And when I run workshops, I encourage people at least try it, not on the whole land in the first year. Set aside a small corner and treat it as an experiment. Make observations, make comparisons, and see for yourself. Don't just believe Tony. See for yourself, is this beneficial or not? And I've been doing this for 40 years. In all of that time, in certainly more than 35 countries, nobody's ever grabbed Tony by the scruff of the neck and said, Tony, you ruined my land. You ruined my livelihood. Only thank you, only blessing. So I really want to leave this thought with you no matter how crazy it seems, it's counterintuitive in many ways, but at least experiment and try it for yourself. If you'd like to have more information, there's a website there on the QR code. World Vision itself has a very ambitious goal. We aim to restore 1 billion hectares of degraded farmland worldwide in the next decade. And so we freely share the information. There's resources online. And we wish you all the best with this. Thank you very much.